Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second day of RHTLaw Asia's Asia Healthcare 2021 Transformation and Possibilities. We hope you enjoyed our first day in which we discuss about the market opportunities and challenges in the region's healthcare sector. We were updated by our expert panel on the development and risk that the industry is currently facing as countries recover from the pandemic. Before we begin, please allow me to point out some housekeeping. Firstly, please note that this event will be recorded. Secondly, please ensure that your microphones are switched off. Thirdly, you may send questions and participate in the conversation via the chat window on your screen. If you wish to remain anonymous, address your questions to the speaker in the Q&A tab on your screen. Fourthly, as you all know, this event is over 4 days. We highly encourage you to join all the sessions until Friday, 30th April. Fifthly, if you encounter any technical issues logging in, and if you're on VPN, please turn it off. And if you continue to experience technical difficulty, please email us at techsupport@faberimage.com. Today, our panel will discuss the health tech landscape in Asia. The key points to be addressed are how innovation is meeting the healthcare needs in Asia, what are the important needs for healthcare in Asia, and lastly, data privacy and security issues in the healthcare industry. Let me start by introducing our moderator, Mr. Rizwi, partner at RHTLaw Asia. Rizwi's main areas of legal practice covers the creation, protection, commercialization, and enforcement of intellectual property in Singapore and in the region. Rizwi also advises on legal and regulatory aspects of technology-related matters, with particular emphasis on data protection, cybersecurity, and competition law issues. In addition, Rizwi's industry focus covers developments in telecommunications sector, fashion and luxury, food and beverage, and the games industry. Joining Rizwi this morning are Mr. Kulbir Sandhu, APAC Regional Head, VP of Digital Strategy, Roche Pharmaceuticals, Mr. Fredrik Nyberg, CEO, MedTech Innovator, Mr. Adam Chee, Chief, Smart Health Leadership Center, National University of Singapore, Mr. Nardev Ramanathan, Senior Analyst, Lux Research Incorporation, and Mr. Tirupathi Karthik, Chief Executive Officer, Napier Healthcare Solutions. Rizwi, over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the Asia Healthcare Summit. My name is Rizwi, and I'll be the moderator for today's panel. Now, today we're going to be discussing health tech, the health tech landscape in Asia, right? Now, to be meaningful, innovation must come with a purpose. Innovation in healthcare especially should serve the needs, the medical needs of the region. And today, I am privileged to have with me several experts who will help me cover this area. Now, in addition, we will also be discussing areas relating to data security and privacy, which I believe are also areas of major concern. Okay, so with this in mind, let me introduce the panel of experts. So we have Nardev, Fredrik, Adam, Karthik, and Kulbir. Okay, so to begin with, I will start with meeting the healthcare needs in Asia, innovation with a purpose. Okay, so maybe to begin with, I will ask each one in the panel what they think, what in their view are the 2 or 3 most important healthcare needs in Asia. Maybe I'll start with Nardev.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Rizwi. My name is Nardev Ramanathan, Senior Analyst at Lux Research, and I lead the Health and Wellness practice over at Lux Research. So Rizwi, you raised, you covered some really important points there. There are a number of emerging trends that we're seeing, and especially trends that are relevant for the healthcare landscape in Asia. Now, in Lux Research, we like to think of health tech innovation in a few different segments, because if you think about health tech innovation itself, there are many kinds of different innovations happening in different areas. So we broadly like to bucket them in three different areas. First up, health tech in the area of research, right? So you're looking at innovation in research, where you're looking at your pharmaceuticals or even your hospitals that are looking at innovating on the research front, be it clinical research or drug discovery and so on. And then you have innovation on the provision of care itself. So how do doctors better deliver care to their patients, and innovations then help them support them to do that better, right? In terms of clinical decision support, you're seeing innovation in terms of better tools that allow them to pass through, different data streams, different sets of data, your MRI, your X-rays, and so on and so forth. And then last but not least, operations is another area that we see a lot of interest as well. So how do you innovate around operations that better allow organizations like hospitals, your pharmaceuticals, your medical device manufacturers, and so on, run their operations better, right? Hence, allowing them to deliver better products and better services that better meet the needs of the patient. So we like to think of them in these three broad buckets. And I think we see a lot of interesting innovation in that aspect, coming to Asia, particularly because Asia, is a region that's seeing, I would say, fairly unique challenges and circumstances, but also opportunities in that sense. So we're seeing a very rapidly rising middle class in a lot of developing economies, right? And then with that, sort of shifting expectations of what they might expect from the healthcare system. At the same time, challenges around, typically in the past, you would see infectious diseases. Of course, let's acknowledge the fact that COVID-19 is a major pandemic right now affecting the world. But before COVID-19, where instances where your malaria and TB, and there's still big problems, challenge a lot of developing economies, we see that with advances in advances in technology and the growth in economies, people are living longer, and chronic diseases are starting to become major problems in many of these nations, right? So a new set of challenges around your diabetes, your chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, hypertension, a longer lived population, so aging related challenges as well. So innovation, we see interesting innovation happening around these spaces as well in Asia. So that's just maybe to give you a sort of a quick overview of what we are seeing over at Lux Research.
Thank you, Nardev. And if I can direct the same question to Mr. Karthik, right, for your take on this.
Sure. Just as an introduction, my name is Karthik. I'm the CEO of Napier Healthcare. We're a Singapore-based company that provides technology solutions to solve healthcare challenges. So we work mainly with providers. Providers we define as hospitals, clinics, network of acute care and subacute care providers. Then we also work with long-term care providers like nursing homes, home care, daycare, senior activity care, allied care, and so on. So pretty much the entire format of providers. At the same time, what is interesting about our business is we work in first world, middle world, and the third world as well. So I see challenges emanating from three kind of problems that I see in these countries. One is there is an access to healthcare. A lot of countries, including big countries, I wouldn't say they're poor by any stretch of imagination, but their access to healthcare for the population is very reduced. They're all concentrated in urban centers, highly dense. And and I would actually say, even I've worked in the US as well, serving some of the customers there, like the critical access hospitals. the nearest critical access hospital sometimes tends to be 40 to 50 miles away. And that's a long distance if you have to, look after someone with an acute need. So the first is access to healthcare. The second is infrastructure, the availability of enough infrastructure in healthcare. And the third is affordable care. Just because you have access, just because you have infrastructure does not mean it is affordable, much as a lot of first world countries have found and figured it out. So then that means because, it's becoming very expensive, you have to therefore invest more of the public funds into it. So when you look at these three issues, based on that, the innovations are also coming up in these countries. Now, Napier is present in Australia, New Zealand. We are in Singapore, Malaysia, in Southeast Asia. We are in India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and then very interestingly, we are also there in East Africa. The challenges in each of these countries are very different, and some of them are solving basic access issues. Some of them are solving infrastructure issues. Some of them are solving the affordability issues. But what constantly seems to be running through, from what I have seen, is the technology is very useful in addressing all of them at the same time, at different points in time, but pretty much all the time. And you would also think that some of these technology issues, like, we talk of fancy things these days, like AI and IoT and cloud and all of that, and you would imagine that's only applicable to the first world countries, but that's not so. It's equally applicable to Africa, for example. If I could tell someone in Africa who's probably looking at a patient and give them a decision-making aid, saying that if you were to look at this is the pain assessment, and based on this, this is what you could do. Or if I could tell them that, if this person is coming with these disease, symptoms and all of that, next 3 days, this is the effect it would have on your consumables and the inventory, then they can go and plan better. So AI, for example, can be applicable there, as also in Singapore, as also in Australia, New Zealand, as also in some of the middle world countries. So innovation in what I see is, back to my earlier point, first point, 3 vectors, and those 3 vectors, it's applicable in every country. So innovation is not restricted to only first world or people with money or infrastructure. So.
Thank you. And can I direct to Adam? What do you think?
Okay, so first thing first, my name is Adam. I head the Smart Health Leadership Center over at the Institute of System Science, National University of Singapore. So to address that question, some of the other panelists have already raised out there are existing issues with healthcare systems around the world, including Singapore and many parts of Asia, ranges from accessibility, affordability, and so on and so forth. But if you were to look at it in a different manner, these are really just symptoms of cracks in the system. Healthcare systems all over the world has not been coping for the longest time. It's just that with the recent pandemic, all these issues shown up a little bit more obviously, and people start to pay attention. So in many, many ways, you can think of it as we are creating tech in the 21st century medical, of the 21st century in the 20th century medical system. So we are not coping well because of not the tech, but the way the overall healthcare system is structured. So the underlying problem really goes into the lack of health resources all over the world, or rather in this case, health resources in certain specific region working together. There's a lack of a continuum of care, if you will. The public health is working in silo away from the acute healthcare system, away from the primary care system, etc., etc. So what really needs to be done is to first put in the fundamentals, which is ensuring a continuum of care. Resources are actually coordinated, so you don't do repeated tests. You actually have information flowing in real time, because everyone, even today, when you look at it, information is there. It's just not going to you when you need it, and that's a big problem. It's actually a lack of communication. It's not really the tech. The tech is there, but the policies is not necessarily in place. So when it brings back to this is where we apply innovation. to address the underlying issues and not the symptoms itself. So a lot of times we fix the symptoms because that's really obvious. But from a more scientific approach, if you will, every system is designed to get exactly its outcome. So when it's not working, you have to fix the system, not the symptoms that arises. And with that, what we advocate is applying data, technology, and design in innovation to address all these issues. So data, as we know, healthcare is extremely evidence-based. We need that, and we need to get more than just acute medical data, which everybody is fussing about. We need environmental data because environment affects our health as well. It's public health. We need social economic data. It all works out together in tandem. So data is very important. Of course, then design. How are you going to design the system to be patient-centered, human-centered? And this is where all the tech comes in, facilitating communication, facilitating patient care, facilitating provider care. We keep, missing the healthcare providers as well. And in the pandemic, it actually reflects this issue, which has been going on for the longest time. Healthcare, the healthcare workforce is not coping. Is not coping at all. And we're doing them a disservice when we focus the innovation only on the patients aspects of things. Don't get me wrong, patients are important. That's why we're here. But if you don't take care of the healthcare professionals, there will be no one to take care of the patients. So these are all important factors that we have to take in when we talk about addressing all these issues that we have with the healthcare systems, not just across Asia, but across the world. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. Mm-hmm. So, Fredrik, what do you think? If Adam seems to suggest that HR, or the lack of enough trained professionals and taking care of them, could be one of those issues that we will be looking at, right? Now, in your experience, coming across from all the all the startups, people who are coming up with new solutions, does it go far enough to address some of these issues?
Thanks, Rizwi. It's a great question, and I think yes, absolutely. There needs to be more information focused on the healthcare professionals. There's no question about that. Just as a very quick background, so my name is Fredrik Nyberg. I am managing director for MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific, based here in Singapore. We are with the world's largest accelerator of medical devices, digital health, and in vitro diagnostics startups. We had over 500 startups from across Asia apply to our program this year, and out of those, probably 2/3 were health tech, or classified themselves as digital health, or were working on devices related to digital health. So we see a tremendous amount of innovation in the health tech arena. Some of those innovations certainly address what Adam was talking about in terms of making life easier for the healthcare professionals. The vast majority, as you would expect, focus obviously on patient outcomes. But the point that was made earlier about access and affordability, I think, are key as well. And you asked earlier about the two main factors that should be driving innovation here, and I think those two are critical for the region. There is a degree of very rapid innovation in health tech that we've seen just in the last few years. The pandemic, of course, has acted as a bit of a catalyst for digital health too, and we've seen very, very rapid improvements in level of innovation. We've seen fundraising in the middle of the pandemic. Bioformis raised $100 million middle of last year. Halodoc from Indonesia just 2 days ago, earlier this week, raised $80 million. So there is a lot of money going around, and there is a lot of innovation, which is really exciting. I think it was in the order of about $6 billion of health tech funding that went into digital health in Asia Pacific just last year. Now, close to $5 billion of those funds went into Chinese entities, as you would expect. And I think as we work with a lot of startups here in the region, We see some that address access and affordability and do that very creatively with new with innovations that are differentiable with high barriers to entry. But to be completely honest, we also see a lot of me too, or not particularly innovative, more incremental innovation. There are hundreds of startups in the region that are working on, let's say, AI to analyze radiology images, or teleconsultation. And investors, maybe can be slightly controversial. Investors may be partly to blame for this because they are looking for shorter times to market. They are more keen to support a technology that can go through a 510(k) with the US FDA, as opposed to a US FDA de novo process, which requires clinical validation at a whole different level. So many of the startups we see are more incremental, and I think if there's something we'd like to see more of, are startups daring to meet some of the more difficult challenges and unmet medical needs in the region.
Yes, thank you. And so, Kulbir, if I can direct the same concerns to you, right? Do you think enough is being done, right, in terms of the thought process going into the types of innovation that we should be having to meet the needs, like what Karthik has mentioned and what Adam has mentioned as well, right? So, do you think enough is being done in the correct direction?
All right, thanks, Riz. Good morning. My name is Kulbir Sandhu. So I'm actually the regional head for digital innovation. Been in the healthcare for about 20 plus years, and I think a lot of the topics which we talked about this morning, I'm very passionate about digital technology. So when we look at the challenges for healthcare, from my perspective, I think quality of care and cost of care is going to continue to drive innovation. So affordability remains one of the biggest issues, not just within Asia Pacific, but for the rest of the world. So I think any innovation which will improve affordability for a given patient is going to be extremely meaningful and is going to be much more impactful. The second one which we talked about is really, I think we talked about a lot about AI and data. So data certainly is extremely important, but I think what's more important is how do we make this data meaningful? How do we present this data at the point of need and the point of care when the patient needs it or when the doctor needs it? So any startup or any initiative in that space, to me, I think is going to be much more impactful, is how do you drive some of the key insights from that data, and then how do you drive the clinical decision support system to make it meaningful for the providers as well as for the patient. The last one is really around sort of personalized healthcare. I think when you look at the healthcare delivery today is too generalized. So when you look at the disease complexity, a lot of the focus is around really treating symptoms. But I think we, as a healthcare manufacturer or the provider, I think we really have to focus on sort of the fundamental root cause of a lot of these complex diseases, how they progress, and what's the prevalence and what's the clinical outcomes for a given medication or for given medical devices. So personalized healthcare, where you provide more of a holistic approach to a healthcare delivery, I think is going to be a sort of a success story in the future, where you not only bring sort of the biological data, you bring in the socioeconomical data, you look at the lifestyle of a given patient, and hopefully aggregate all these data from multiple sources. Maybe could be variables, could be from their medical records. So this all needs to come together in order to deliver a healthcare delivery which is going to be much more impactful and responsible for the best clinical outcomes. The last one is, I think we talked about here, that digital technology is going to be an enabler for a lot of this. And so even though COVID actually exposed a lot of the gaps in the healthcare system, but I see tremendous opportunity in front of us where I think digital technology is going to play a pretty important role to be able to enable those and convert a lot of these touch points using digital technology and bring these integration of diagnostics and treatment options together for better clinical outcomes for our patients.
Okay. Thank you, Kulbir. Now, which actually brings us very nicely to the second issue of concern, which is the security and privacy issues relating to healthcare data. So, maybe I'll pose this question to all of you. Do you think data security is one of the biggest concerns today in the healthcare industry? Right? And if so, where are the areas of weakness or concern, and what could be done? Right? Maybe I'll start off with Karthik.
Thanks. I think before I jump into that, one thing that I read a lot in the papers in Singapore and also around the world is you get these scam calls, right? People getting scam calls, elderly people getting, scammed by callers and, inadvertently transferring money to someone. All of that comes from some source. I'm not saying healthcare is the main one, but healthcare certainly is one of them, because we are storing patient information, we are storing patient personal data and everything. So a lot of these things can actually, we don't see that as a problem today, because most of the time when we talk of data and privacy, we are talking of patient and their issues and all of that. But this is one unconnected thing which always people miss. Now, data privacy comes in many flavors, and it also has a lot of impact. So one of the reports I read from last year to this year, the number of cyber security attacks have multiplied 200x. Not 5%, 10%, 20 times, 200 times, 200x, which means you're talking of 20,000 times more than what it was in the pre-COVID. So now, if I break that down, and if I'm like in the business that I'm in, where I'm running the core systems of all these hospitals and nursing homes and everyone else, I got to make sure that the data doesn't get into the wrong hands. So how do we protect? So if I can come from the outside, the first one is obviously you're talking of application security. Application security is within the application. So you're talking of the UI layer, the application layer, and the database layer. So I have to make sure system is secure at that level, but also in between, the communication between those layers has to be encrypted and anonymized. So that's the first layer of security. The second part of security that we should focus on is, today you have all these OWASP, top 10, OWASP, top 10 security issues and all of that. So there are these industry top 10 issues that you'll always have to address. The moment we address 10, there will be 11th or 12th one which the hacker will get smart about. So this is a lifelong marathon, if I may. It doesn't start and end tomorrow. You can't say there's a start and an end. So I think that's the second point. The third one which I want to talk about is all technology companies must look at is what I call as FIPS, or the Federal Information Processing System standards in the US. It's how the US federal agencies manage information, how they transact information both at rest and in transmission. In transmission, it's very important to make sure you have anonymization before encryption. So we are involved in a lot of these things that we sign up to. We keep track of these trends. There's a separate team within Napier that kind of looks at these security issues. I've had to double that team in the last 12 months. That's the kind of impact it's having on information security within and in transmission.
Right.
So long answer, but
Oh no, that's fine. That's fine. I'm actually curious, Nardev, in your perspective, what do you think are the consequences of having either a weak or an inadequate security system in place to protect medical related data?
Great question, Rizwi. Actually, I think Karthik has very nicely covered a lot of the key points, but maybe I'll just talk about one anecdote where a security lapse or a security gap has really led to very dire consequences. And I have to go out of Asia for a while because the example I'm thinking of is actually in the United Kingdom, where these hackers, they used a ransomware approach, right, to actually access certain systems within the NHS. And it gets complicated because, like in the United Kingdom, you have a single-payer system, so NHS pretty much runs the entire healthcare system in the United Kingdom, unlike other jurisdictions, right? So these hackers managed to get in, found a gap in some of the systems within the NHS, and basically went in and locked the entire sort of electronic health record management systems in a number of different hospitals. And the reason was quite sad to say, quite a simple thing, right? It was a lapse there because they just basically, some of these hospitals in the NHS basically didn't update their Microsoft patch. I think Karthik probably knows this example. And because of that, these hackers were able to lock the entire system. So you can imagine the consequences that comes along, right? The doctors were unable to access the records, especially for very critical cases where they actually need access to the system. Basically, they were locked out, right? So they didn't know how to then get the necessary information to provide the care that's needed for these patients. And of course, the monetary costs were in the hundreds of millions of pounds. But money is one thing, right? You're talking about lives at stake, right? And so that became a major issue that NHS had to really look into very carefully for a simple thing, just for, to ensure that the security system, the security team is on top of all the different patches and the different security protocols that needs to be met. Again, back to Karthik's point where he talked about doubling, the security team capabilities in his company. So that's one example I can think of, and the dire consequences. There could be similar examples in Asia. I mean, in Singapore, I think everyone is familiar with the SingHealth breach and how it made compromised millions of health records, including the Prime Minister's health record. The consequences to that, I think, is that, of course, a lot of these health records are now compromised, and we don't know how, down the road it's going to, impact us. But you can imagine if these records are made publicly available to the highest bidder, so to speak, it can also be used as a ransom tool, right? And also, if these records get compromised, if it gets accessed by, say, insurance providers or employers, we don't know how that data can be used against some of these individuals who are looking to, get the necessary sort of health insurance plans, or even, just looking to apply for a job. Maybe there are certain risk factors that, once revealed, the employers, now knowing that information, may discriminate against some of these individuals. So those are some things to think about as well. A couple of points.
Thanks. So, Adam, maybe I would get your take on this.
Okay.
From the technical perspective, right? Or maybe even other perspective. What do you think where do you think are the weaknesses lacking, and what could be done more?
Okay. I'll share two examples.
Okay.
So the first example was when I first started out working in a hospital. That's close to 20 years ago. And we first started implementing electronic medical records. Back then, it was a big thing because we were transiting from very early stages from paper to electronic, and not many hospitals around the world have done that. And this particular instance was where we have a clerical staff. She was caught accessing medical records of her relatives, and which she has no right to, and subsequently exposed, and she was fired. And there's a hint of clinical confidentiality in that, because the patient didn't want her conditions to be made known. So post-mortem, we look at that. At first, everybody's like, yes, we implemented systems that prevent access. But when we sit down and think that actually this has been going on for the longest time, it's just that now we capture it digitally. So that's the first point I want to make. A lot of times when you talk about security breaches, hackers and what have you, even the SingHealth saga, it was human error. It wasn't technical.
Okay.
It's human policies.
Correct.
So start from there. Policies are more important. Who is accessing your data? Previously, it's easy. You get to the medical record files. You start flipping. You photostat. Nobody knows. It happens. It's just that now it becomes more difficult. But there's also a question is, let's say today I'm practicing a certain branch of medicine in a hospital. Am I allowed to see everything that a patient is presenting to me? So it becomes very touchy, right? I'm supposed to assess you as a person, as a instead of just disease focus, assessing you on the whole. That's a health perspective. At the same time, there may be certain clinical information that you are not able to determine if it's relevant to my diagnosis up front. I actually have to look at it and say, oh, actually, I didn't need that part. But until I do that, who are you to actually tell me that this information is not to be seen by me? So this is where healthcare is very different from other industries like finance point of view. It's not so clear cut, number one. So it's really policy, and that's something we have to live with. This is the nature of the industry. So yeah, more policy before you apply tech. The second example I'd like to give is similarly when I was working in a hospital. Very early on, and I even published a paper on this close to 20 years ago. I was saying that nobody is patching their system in the hospital. But what I did one further is I came to explain why people are not patching their systems in the hospital. Everybody knows that we have to patch. It's a given. But a lot of medical devices these days, they run on Windows. In fact, for the past 10 to 20 years, they've been doing that. What a lot of people don't understand is medical devices are FDA certified. You change the underlying software, you have to get it reassessed. That costs a lot of money. And when you patch a system, you have to reassess whether the software will have implication to the medical grade software. And you have to reassess that. No one's going to pay for that because it's not covered in the maintenance contract, what have you. So there are lots of systems out there in the hospitals that are not patched, not because people are lazy, not because people don't know. They are caught in a dilemma. These are medical grade devices. Yes, I can go and patch it. And if there's something affecting the software, the medical software, and there's a liability that occurs, who takes the blame? The manufacturer says, well, I didn't ask you to apply this patch, right? You did it on your own. So that's very difficult dilemma. So there are other ways to do it. Again, it's policy. How do you segregate your network to make sure it's not shared with front-facing? So there are technical areas to go around it. But again, still you see a lot of these cybersecurity sagas that come out. It is almost never the technical part that fail. It is someone along the way, they plug in a USB into the computer where they're not supposed to. They leave a network port open and they plug it in, or the vendor servicing the equipment, they come in and plug in. It's all human errors, actually. Yeah, it's all very rare. There are instances where it's technical issues, but very rare when I see a big major saga that comes out, it was the effect of technical errors. It's almost always human. So to round back to your question, what can we do about it? Start education, audit, be mindful, be aware. And again, it's easy to say that because we say, hey, Mr. Medical Doctor, Miss Nurse, please be mindful of all this when you are looking after your patients. You do understand that there are understaffed, critical situations, patients are dying, they're going to react fast. The last thing they want to think about is, I have equipment that I'm supposed to plug in. Do I take a 2-minute assessment whether it is the right thing? They're not going to be bothered by that. The core nature of their job is to provide healthcare and save lives. Right. So again, very, very difficult situation, but that just goes to show that a lot of the principles that you have in finance, logistics, doesn't apply to healthcare. Yeah.
If I may just add a very quick point to what Adam mentioned, I think putting an innocent USB, right? I just want to draw us back to the medieval times when huge castles and kings were fighting wars. They never actually managed to destroy the whole citadel or the whole thing. All that happened was the security guard at the bottom of the place, he just opened a small door. Now this, what he mentioned, is exactly that. Huge forts and kingdoms fall because of that one security guard.
The weakest link.
The weakest link is perhaps the most unseen one.
Yep.
And that's the problem with security. You can't have enough governance, you can't have enough resources. Even the most richest country, most richest person can't have enough security. So it's a constant thing. So I think what we have to look at is, I might win 9, but they will win 1 at least. And so we have to just think on those lines. It cannot be a zero-sum game.
I agree with you. So it's not a matter of preventing systems from being hacked. It's what do you do to, number one, mitigate it, and number two, what do you do when you actually detect the first sign of intrusion, and you have safeguards in place to cut off that particular network, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, these days it's tough. It's not impossible. So if you look at Wall Street, the financial systems almost never get hacked. Why? They put in a lot of money. Are we willing to do that for healthcare? You go to any healthcare system and says, I want to put in a lot of money for cybersecurity. It's good to have, but I got more pressing areas which I need to put money. So whenever I talk to healthcare providers, and they tell me the same thing, oh Adam, the system is blah, 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 technology is not there. I said, no, it's a financial issue.
Right.
It's not a tech issue. Yeah.
So, okay.
Can I just make a quick point to what Adam was saying? Because he made an important point here about patches and the relationship with regulators and getting patches approved. And I think that's really very much part of the problem here. And I think industry needs to find ways of working with regulators, not just in Asia, but with US FDA and others, to ensure that they are able to approve some of those updates and firmware upgrades and so on, because that is a huge problem. And the medical device industry are way behind other industries in terms of building in the appropriate barriers to avoid cybersecurity attacks. So I think that collaboration needs to happen. I know the industry is working on lobbying and making sure that regulators are adapting their approval processes, and I think in Singapore and in Australia, in the US, in Korea, Japan, it's starting to work well. But there are still many markets out there where they don't have that, and therefore it takes a long time and it costs a lot of money for the industry to get those upgrades approved.
Understand. So, Kulbir, you were going to say something?
Yes, I think a lot has been said. I think the one thing which is fundamental to the data security or sort of the privacy is that it is a multi-stakeholder problem. I think no one individual in the supply chain should be able to solve it. They might be able to solve it, but all these supply chain stakeholders, they need to come together. The medical records or the medical data is extremely personal to an individual. So even if we have access control, even though we have encryption, we have the best policies, I think when you look at the future of healthcare, as we rely more on automation, as we rely more on AI, more on data, and we're going to make the software be responsible for prescriptive analytics, or maybe prescribe some of the medication and treatment option, the security is going to become even more important. So building a redundancy in the system. So if you're going to have a diagnosis built on an AI algorithm, we need to have some sort of intervention or redundancy built in the system to make sure that there are 2 or 3 checks in the design control to make sure that that diagnosis is not the wrong one. So in addition to the access control, the design controls, building the sort of the privacy around data, I think building a redundancy in the system is going to be extremely important as well.
Yes, agreed. Having advised on security and privacy issues for quite some time, I must say I agree to a large extent that human error and lack of awareness shall we say, lack of education, plays actually quite a big role in any inadvertent leaks, right? So I agree, right? But okay, with this background, okay, what do you guys think needs to be done more, right? It's one thing to say better education or more awareness, right, through the regulatory landscape, or maybe even more training, okay? But is there anything else? Maybe through the innovation, through the technology that can achieve, can redress some of these weaknesses, can make it a little less easy, shall we say, for the hackers to go through. So maybe Adam,
Yep.
give your take on this.
So I think a lot of the important points has been covered, and definitely human issues. We need more training over the view. That's a given. And in fact, this is what we try to do on the center as well, for part of nation building, industrial capability buildings as well. We give out webinars, talks, a lot of this for free to raise awareness to stakeholders. But applying innovation back, it's easy to pass the buck back to the end user. You have to do this, you have to do that. And again, the nature of our industry makes it very difficult, because that's the last thing in their mind, that to be taking care of cybersecurity issue. They know it's important, but that's not their main concern in the day-to-day execution of their duties. So this is where we can apply innovation to help them. Again, it goes back to data technology and design. Are we designing systems, and this doesn't necessarily have to be physical systems or products, that actually mitigate or prevent them from having to make that mistakes in the first place? So for example, are we disabling, back to the USB example, are we disabling all the USB outputs, the drives, so they are not accessible on computers? Or why are we even exposing the USB outlet in your medical devices? These are some of the stuff that you can actually preemptively reduce. Don't even let them have the option to make mistakes like that. And in addition, of course, training, constantly having someone help do a double check, audit, if you will. It's very easy to get caught up in the action. So if you're going to the ward and you tell the nurses, hey, you have to do this, and you appoint maybe the chief nurse, so you have to go around doing double check, etc., etc. Sounds great on paper, but after a while, that person is going to be swamped out with work. Subconscious bias is going to come in. She's going to check from every day to every 2 days to every week. So this is where audit still plays a role. Someone has to go around double checking. They're free from the biasness, free from the maintenance of the work. That's important. Again, you might think that, hey, then this is like policies. Yeah, but a lot of times innovations is also on the system level itself. And of course, you can automate that. You can use technology, etc., etc. But I think that's equally important. Yeah. In addition to having, say, you must go for more training. It goes back. If I were to use another example in health, you tell people who are smoking, you shouldn't smoke. They all know that. Everybody knows that they shouldn't smoke. The question a lot of people don't ask is why, in that case, is that person smoking? Yeah.
Right.
Cigarettes is easily accessible. It's relatively affordable. They have stress factors. They have no alternative of outlets to release that stress, or maybe it's not as easily accessible to them. So when you translate it back into the healthcare management, we call it the person-centered care model. Not only must you provide the care for them, the information for them, enable them to actually be able to take care of themselves, and make sure there's resources. Yeah. So this model you can apply to almost any management issues as well. Yeah. So that's my take. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking that if you want to increase and improve awareness and education, one very, should we say, obvious way will be certification, raising standards, getting everybody up to speed, getting aware, being aware of good industry practices, and getting everyone educated and certified, so that they are not only aware, they understand, and they can implement in their daily operations. Okay, so maybe Kulbir, in your view, right? How do you think we can use this, in from a R&D perspective, or can we or not?
Yeah. So I think, as we said, that when we look at the security of the data privacy, it's actually a multi-tier problem, and I think in order to solve that problem, it has to be a multi-tier solution at different levels. So we talked about encryption, we talked about access controls. As we depend more on data and more on intelligence based on AI algorithms and putting a lot of these what we call robotic process automation, I think we can use the intelligent software to really find the weakest link in the whole supply chain. And we can use intelligent software to build the redundancy or the fault tolerant, that in case if something fails in the supply chain, how would we react to it, and what kind of intervention we're going to have in order to solve that problem. So I think RPA will actually play a pretty important role in what we call checking sort of the integrity of the system on a daily basis, or maybe every 1 hour, whatever the heartbeat is going to be. So that's I think one area. Second one is, to your point, I think having a framework or policies around cybersecurity and data integrity is going to be extremely important, so that from an interoperability point of view and from a compliance point of view, that everybody in that model speaks the same language. They know what they need to comply to, they know what the audit rules are, and they know what the interfaces are. So they can all comply to the same framework. So I think that's going to be extremely important, and that needs to be done not in isolation, but more as a partnership and collaboration between industry, healthcare providers, and in some cases with the patient advocacy groups as well. I think the third one, which is a fundamental sort of the human error we talked about, is how do we ingrain this into the philosophy and the mindset as we are sort of relying more and more on computers and algorithms. How do we ingrain that into the mindset? So that comes back to training and enforcement and obviously compliance at those levels. I think those three are going to be critical to kind of make sure that we have a system in place where there's still a probability of this happening, but I think you have done a pretty good job in order to close those gaps.
Thanks, Kulbir. In fact, what you mentioned about collaboration and presumably the exchange of ideas seems to be something which I believe can be very useful experience. Like Karthik, for example, you are a man of the world. You've seen a lot, done many things in many places and all that. So I'm sure you've come across the good practices or best practices, shall we say, across many jurisdictions and many countries. And the sharing of best practices, I'm sure, will be a very useful exercise in helping people improve themselves and understand. Now, how do you think this can be best achieved? Bearing in mind, we are talking about across jurisdictions. I mean, I think it's fair to say that cyber attacks are a global phenomenon. Right? You cannot isolate yourself and think that, oh, this is a local problem with local solutions. Right. Has to be tackled from a larger geographical thinking, you see. So where do you think we can go with this?
So let me start with the first basic step that most organizations tend to miss, which is they don't understand fully what am I trying to protect. If you understand what assets I'm trying to protect, then I will be able to then come up with a policy. So there are two steps. First is understanding what am I trying to protect. The second part is what is the policy I want. So in Singapore, for example, we have a very good recommendation from the authorities here. They say every organization must have a Chief Information Security Officer. I think you probably are more qualified to talk about it than I am. But Napier, for example, we do keep a CISO that is responsible for the data and oversight of data. But going beyond that, you have to have what I call, and I have seen successful organizations that do this, they adopt what I call a security by design. Everything that you do is by design. You understand what you're trying to protect, then you have security by design. So you have to have a formal policy, and I'm a little paranoid, so what we do is every year we look at that document and we update it for anything that we might have not covered the last time. So like, what the gentleman from Intel said many, many years ago, only the paranoid survive. So this is that particular case where only the paranoid will survive. You have to be paranoid because this is not a one-off. This is not going to end today, like I said at the beginning of my opening remarks. This is forever. Yes. Security is forever. You got to be working on it every now and then. You have to make sure you have all these processes in place. Now, there's a beautiful thing that people don't, again, connect the dots. If you have a policy that you have signed up for internally, if you have a security by design, it will avoid all the issues that Adam was talking about. How many times do I want the nursing head to go down the ward and keep on checking, did you do this right? Is once an hour right, or is once in every 5 minutes, or is it once in an hour, once in few days, once in a week, month? What is the frequency? If you don't get the design and the policy right, your governance overheads will keep on going. Soon you will have an army of nurses that you need to deliver care, but you'll have another army of nurses equally knowledgeable to see if they are doing the right thing or not. No. Right? So if you get the first two steps right, you will be able to reduce the governance overheads. In security and everything else, we must always look at how do I get to a point where my governance is light touch. It should not overwhelm. The solution should not destroy the problem and the patient at the same time. So, that's what I believe all successful organizations have done, and those that have not been successful, this is probably what they should look at.
Yes. Fredrik, if I may direct you to similar concern, what do you think, from your perspective, from what you have seen, the startups and all that, their ideas, their solutions, right? Do you think they give enough consideration? Do you think they give enough thought to security by design, as Karthik has mentioned? And if not, is there anything that you think they should be changing in their mindset or in their approach?
It's a great question, Rizwi, and the short answer is no. There's very little attention, and I'm generalizing, of course. There are many exceptions, but generally, a startup that's focusing on developing a new AI algorithm or developing a new tenant consultation solution or another health tech innovation, cybersecurity is not necessarily first and foremost a priority for them. So I think anything that we can do to raise awareness, to make them fully appreciate what those challenges are. I think there are some aspects that of those innovations that they will need to address early on, and they may relate to interoperability, they may relate to we spoke about it earlier, rules that relate to, for example, requiring data captured from a patient to reside locally on local servers. So for example, China has this, Vietnam has this. So you have localization rules that pose challenges that startups as well as multinationals will need to deal with. But overall, there is not awareness at an early development stage for many of these companies.
So do you think it's a good idea you make security a prerequisite?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, prerequisite to what? As they start to plan regulatory approvals and so on, then then that element comes into play. Risk analysis is fundamental to ISO 13485 and so on. So at some point in time, they will need to think about some of these challenges, but it doesn't necessarily happen early enough.
Right. Okay. So Adam, given this sort of like scenario that we have, I mean, I hear what you say. More needs to be done. I believe you very strongly believe the human element is really one major aspect which needs to be improved, whether it is lack of awareness, whether it is taking care of professionals, right? But if you consider, say, data, or in this case medical data, as the fuel which drives this industry, okay, which level do you think we should start? Right at the very top, regulatory policy, what have you, and then it drips down all the way, flows down all the way, or should it start like grassroots level, and then after that you bring it up?
That is a very tricky question. The answer should be a twofold approach. So there needs to be some sort of guidance, because we must understand that privacy is subjective. That's based on culture.
Right.
What is taboo in country A is actually may mean nothing in country B. So every country should, at least based on their cultural requirements and of course current abilities, come up with a goal. So that's the policy level. At the same time, there are universal principles that you can apply regardless. That should be training awareness on this level, so everybody gets it. So a lot of times I think people are not malicious when they fail to do something, is they fail to see the importance of that inaction. That again brings back to they don't know what they don't know, therefore it's good to bring some level of awareness and training and whatever you. So I think a twofold approach is important. But again, it goes back to what is privacy. It really is subjective country to country. And this is where it's difficult for regulators to come up with an overarching principle that's going to cover everyone. Again, very different from finance and logistics and what have you, one size fits all. And that's why it's difficult to do certification, if you will, on a system level. You can do certification of skills, everybody understands that these are the core body of knowledge, that's easy. But when you go in and you try to audit an organization, so like for example the US, they have HIPAA, right? HIPAA audits the actual organization itself, same as the JCI for quality. You can't take that principles and say I apply in China, Japan, Korea, Singapore, because the healthcare systems is different. So these are things that we have to understand that is inherently tricky in the world of health and healthcare. And when we talk about patient privacy, if you apply it to finance, logistics, and what have you, we're trying to protect the commercial interests of some institute. In healthcare, it's the other way around. It's personal privacy you're trying to talk about. The whole ball game changes. The underlying principle changes. Because again, you have to deal with individuals, and when you deal with humans, that's where all the problems comes up with. So yeah, that's my take. It has to be a twofold approach in a very mindful context. Yeah.
I understand. So maybe Nardev, can I just throw this at you? I hear what Adam has said about everything needs to be taken from a individual perspective, right? But surely, I mean, again, this is just my own personal take, but surely medical treatment, diagnostics, even the recovery and restoration, that's universal. Whether you are in different countries and all that, the disease or the symptoms and all that are the same. The treatment should be the same, right? And therefore, the medical data that is required, I mean, honestly speaking, I think should be the same. So in that sense, as much as the experience is customized and personal, there also needs to be some sense of universal application or applicability. Now, in your line of work, when you have come across, all the different areas, right? All the different countries have you been to, and then you see the different environments and all that. Surely there is some measure of universal applicability of certain basic data, right, for every situation.
That's a good question, Rizwi. I'm going to challenge that statement a little bit because, and this is slightly outside the data privacy, because I don't fully agree that medical diagnosis and treatment is same for everyone. From the sheer fact that I used to be, at one point in time, I used to work at A-Star and I was in the industry development group, and at that point, we were working on the National Precision Medicine Program, which is already now in phase 2, which some of you might know. And the whole reason behind that is because the fact that Asians are fundamentally quite different from Caucasians and Africans and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Our genetics pretty much are the blueprint for who we are. But historically, if you look at how pharmaceuticals have been developed, treatments have been done, and so on and so forth, it's based a lot on trial data on mostly European or Caucasian data, right? In fact, in a study in Nature journal published this, up to I think until 2010s, 90% of all the genomic data in the world out there were from Caucasian populations, right? Such a small proportion were actually from Asians and other ethnic groups, right? So actually, the National Precision Medicine, one of the things that they're looking at is to try to build a benchmark of what sort of normal is, what healthy is in the Asian context, and then think about how these medications, these treatments can be tailored more specifically and delivered more precisely to Asians. So I think there's a bit of a thing that I just want to add there. I think it's something to consider. But going back to your, I think, bigger point that, there is obviously some level of universality, some level of best practices, I think, that can be adopted across the board, right? Despite there being, these inherent differences, A, from a cultural perspective, but also B, from an underlying genetic perspective. And I think that's where, I think to Fredrik's point also, a lot of collaboration is currently happening and needs to happen and continue to happen more and more, where more of these sort of government agencies and organizations talk to one another and try to understand how to apply best practices that can be applied to the local context. Now maybe some treatment paradigms have to be slightly shifted or tweaked based on certain biological or certain cultural practices, but I think there can be learnings that can be taken from different jurisdictions.
Right. Okay. So maybe we'll take this opportunity to wrap up what we've discussed today. So can I maybe ask each one of you to give your take on what we discussed and what is your personal takeaway from this? Let's start with Karthik.
Sure. Thanks. I think we discussed two topics today, both of them very important. One is the innovation, and to me, I think the artificial intelligence, which is both within the enterprise and on the edge, including IoTs and other kind of things, I think it will assume a greater and greater role in decision making in health outcomes. So I think that's about the innovation. On data privacy, I think it's just a new normal, just like COVID is. We'll have to learn to live with it, and I think there are no shortcuts to it. It is something that we have to internalize and think of it every day. Security by design as a mindset is a good thing to do. I might add one more point to that in my summation. All these hackers and ransomware attacks eventually profit through cryptocurrency. So maybe it's good for all the governments to get together to see how they might either regulate it, or like most of the governments are doing, they're actually trying to ban it outright. And I think it's in the right direction. So I think if you catch hold of the cryptocurrency receipts and that flow of money, this activity might actually come down. It's a little more simplistic view of that, but that's a dimension nevertheless. But thank you for this opportunity.
Okay. And Fredrik, what about you?
Sure. So I'll come back maybe to the, I think there'll be plenty of views here on security and data privacy. But on the topic of innovation, maybe just to reiterate the point I made earlier to any of the startups in the audience, to really dare to make some difficult choices to address difficult unmet medical needs. Because if you're out there doing a Me Too or something that is really just incremental innovation, it will only take you so far.
Yes.
There are a vast number of opportunities in meeting some much more complicated challenges. Instead of simply developing, let's say, a wearable sensor that picks up ECG, where there are thousands of companies doing the same thing, pick up 5 or 6 different parameters and build an algorithm about how that can develop into a more sophisticated tool, so that you build up barriers to entry for what you're doing. You create a more defensible, differentiable position for yourself. Ultimately, that's going to lead to more lucrative exits, and investors will pick up on that, of course.
Thank you. Adam, what about you?
Well, if I were to sum it up, regardless whether it's the topic of innovation or data security and privacy, healthcare is actually complex. There's no cookie cutter solution. So a lot of times we try to generalize, and we can at certain aspects of things. But yeah, for many occasions, let's not get away and think there's cookie cutter solutions. And it always starts with a conversation. Yeah, talk about it, explore, look for the root cause, look for the context, and then apply accordingly before you throw in the tech and the innovation. Yeah.
Right. Okay. It looks like we have a question from the floor. What is the cost of security by design? That's a rather open-ended question. Yes. Because it can cover many different facets. Karthik, I know you want to answer this because this is really your domain now. But maybe I'll ask Kulbir. Right? You want to give it a try?
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, it's going to be very hard to sort of quantize the cost for a given solution. However, as I said, I think the security implementation and the design, it needs to be really sort of at the multiple levels. At the low-level firmware, low-level application software, interfaces, access control, and then the firewalls, and then also the policy in terms of what the policy should be, what the framework is going to look like. So it is a multi-stakeholder problem, and I think multi-stakeholder solution as well. So all the parties needs to come together in order to build this design, both bottom up and top down. So that's the first principle. I think the second one is, again, the healthcare is extremely complex. There are a lot of different stakeholders. There's a lot of flow of data from devices to capital equipment to medical records. I think it's extremely important for a given organization, what does it mean to you when you say, I'm concerned about security or I'm concerned about privacy? Because even privacy, in some cases, I think when you look at sort of maybe a personal information of a given patient, that's something you want to protect. But there is a lot of other data which belongs to a patient. It could be actually very useful to the patient population. So So privacy needs to be broken up, it needs to be sort of broken up into those two segments, because eventually when we look at some of the best practices or how their given treatment is going to be effective for a given population, you actually need that data to be accessible, right? So this kind of goes back to the design for your security. Cybersecurity, I think is definitely, again, it's a multi-stakeholder approach, and you really have to look at what are some of the tiers of different systems you have in your organization in order to really contain it and make it bulletproof and have a fault redundant system to be able to prevent and really preempt some of the weaker links into your system.
Got it. So maybe if, as you say, you give a very creative interpretation to the question, right? It's not just in terms of monetary cost, right? It can be, it can cost you in other respects, right? So privacy is one aspect, but maybe not so much privacy, but more accessibility, and that sort of like if you interplay that with privacy, sometimes you make medical data accessible, you sacrifice a little bit of privacy, but it's for the greater good.
That's right.
So the cost there is maybe a downplaying of the privacy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think one of the things we have seen during COVID, the hit on medical tourism. So you have patients, for example, from Indonesia coming to Singapore for treatment. Because of the data migration rules, the data actually doesn't flow with the patient where the patient is, and it's a resident in a given country. So if we can remove some of those barriers and flow the data with, along with the patient, I think it opens up a lot of opportunities in case of medical tourism. That's just one example of that.
Right. So we have another question. Do you have any innovative solution to improve the current distant or virtual consultation? The current distant or virtual consultation. I believe if I again give an interpretation, this would be in your field, in Karthik, telemedicine, telehealth. Right? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, it is. I think telemedicine has been. I read somewhere the first time telemedicine was used was sometime in 1900s. Now a lot of people would find it very strange, but the moment you pick up a phone and consult with the person on the other end, it is actually telemedicine, right? So if you move away from that simplistic definition to where it is today, it's almost like AD and BC, pre-COVID and post-COVID. Post-COVID, what I read, I just was doing some internal discussions yesterday. The market size is now supposed to be $250 billion. A year ago, they wouldn't put it past $40 or $50 billion. So it's a 5x explosion. So what I'm hoping is, Fredrik, to your point earlier, a lot more innovation here that I am looking personally to. We are also driving innovation with our teams, but the innovation that I'd like to see is completely destroy the idea of a physical space needed to deliver care. Care must be delivered anywhere. Where there is a patient is where the care must be delivered. Why should you always say that come to where am I for you to get care? And I think if you use that and take away the existing construct about having a physical hospital, physical space and all of that for someone to come and get care, I think you'll be able to come up with a lot more innovation in that sense. So I think that is one. Obviously, I'm not saying hospitals will go away tomorrow morning as a result of that. Acute care conditions where you have a CVD or a kidney failure or heart attack or any of these things, you will need them to come to the facility for sure. But for all else, think of completely destroying the hospital in that sense.
Okay.
Both from policy and planning position.
Yes.
Rizwi, if I can just make a quick comment to that point as well, to the question about teleconsultation. One area, if the question is about what areas of innovation that relate to teleconsultation are potentially of interest, then I would say if a startup goes beyond just looking at remote video interaction with a clinician, but combines that with remote patient monitoring, with sensor technologies, with the ability to take, let's say, retinal images in case of ophthalmology, and combines all of that and ultimately has the ability to remotely dispense medicine, then all of a sudden you have a much broader, maybe much more innovative remote healthcare solution.
Right. Okay. Got it.
So one innovation which I can talk about. So we're working with a startup called Doc Equity. So what they do is basically they have a platform where they bring multiple KOLs onto a single platform, and then the KOLs currently are, they have roughly about 250,000 KOL within Asia Pacific. But one of the use cases which is very powerful is that you can actually connect a KOL in Cambodia with an expert somewhere in Europe and the US, and they can co-manage a case at a remote location. So this is kind of a telementoring application. But if you look at sort of the horizons and the opportunity with that platform, you can not only bring multiple KOLs, but you can share some of the best practices. You can share a lot of the outcomes from your practice, from your treatment options. And so this is sort of the future of virtual healthcare, where you can bring all these KOLs together onto this platform, create virtual communities, and share that information and learn from each other, and co-manage cases in remote locations.
I think this pivots very nicely to the next question. What do you think are the main medical technologies and innovation that would drive healthcare in the next 10 years? So maybe Nardev, can I throw this at you?
Absolutely. So, actually we at Lux Research, we work a lot of startups that are looking to innovate in different spaces. And one of the trends that we're seeing a lot right now is in the space of non-invasive glucose monitoring.
Okay.
Right, for diabetes, because as we all know, diabetes is a growing concern in many parts of the world, developing, even undeveloped economies. Right, and I think the sort of holy grail for a lot of these healthcare providers has been, how do you get your diabetic patients to comply with their glucose monitoring regimen, right? Because if you think about it, if I would ask you to prick your finger once, it's fine, right? You just prick once. But these diabetic patients have to check a lot, right? So your gold standard today is your typical Lancet that you prick your finger and you get a reading immediately. But do that 20 times a day, maybe not so comfortable for the rest of your life. It's quite unthinkable, right? And you've seen some innovation come along. You have minimally invasive patches now. Abbott Freestyle Libre has it, where you have a patch on your arm. You have it for 2 weeks. Basically, it's just minimally invasive, but basically it looks at your interstitial fluid, and it collects the blood glucose data from there, right? But it's still invasive, right? Although it's minimal, it's still invasive. So the next generation of technology is really looking at how do we then get data from your blood glucose without ever piercing your skin, right? And so there's been some interesting innovation around optical technology, right? Using optical technology to try to basically interact with your glucose molecules. It changes the wavelength and it gives you a different reading outside, right? So that's been an area of hot interest. Obviously, a lot of technical hurdles, but we are seeing some startups, trying, getting closer and closer to more, I wouldn't say accurate, but it's getting through some of the hurdles in terms of, being sort of more tractable and closer to some of the available technologies today. So that's definitely one. To some of the points made earlier, where we want care to be delivered basically anywhere, outside the hospital setting if possible, and we're seeing more sort of miniaturized portable technologies come along, where traditionally they have been sort of more huge and sort of more complicated to handle and requires an individual to actually go to a center. So one example is your kidney dialysis, right? We know chronic kidney conditions are also becoming a bigger problem, especially with people living longer and growing older, right? So if you think about dialysis, what's the process like, right? If you need to go to your dialysis center, you typically need to take the day off. You need to travel to the center, book an appointment, assuming they have availabilities. You have to plan in advance and so on. But right here in Singapore, we have a company called AWAC Technologies, that's looking at making dialysis portable. So it's almost like a wearable sort of a dialysis machine where you can continue doing what you need to do. You can go to work with it, right? All the while the dialysis is actually happening, on you. So, these I think are a couple of things that we are seeing, which hopefully go mainstream in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you. So, I guess that's all the time we have for today. I would like to say thank you to the panel for all their expert views, contribution. Really appreciate your time to come here and share all the things that you've done today. Do join us tomorrow as my colleague Piyush will cover healthcare supply chain in the new normal. And from me, Rizwi, and from the panel here, thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.